Okay, so we're moving on to something new. Let's just review what we've done. First of all, we've looked at factoring out the greatest common factor and then factoring a four-term polynomial. These were from section 8.5 in your book. Okay, now we're moving on to section 8.6, chapter 8, lesson 6 in your book. We're going to do problems in here, but if you feel like you need a little extra help, you can look this up on the internet or look in your book and find some more examples and some more help. So we're factoring a trinomial that's 3 terms and the leading coefficient has to be 1. Okay? You'll need pages 7 and 8 from the packet. Pages 7 and 8 from the packet. Okay, so we're starting on page 7, factoring a trinomial which is 3 terms and it has a leading coefficient of 1. So before we can do that though, we need to review the mechanics of FOIL. Remember what FOIL is? FOIL is when you have 2 binomials that are being multiplied together. It's a way to remember how to multiply binomials. So F stands for first, O stands for the outer terms, I stands for the inner terms, and L stands for the last terms. Okay, so what were the first terms? X times X. Okay, what are the outer terms? 3 times X. The inner terms were 2 times X, and the last terms were 6. So what you did was you multiplied first terms together, and you got X squared. And then you multiplied the outer terms and got 3X, the inner terms and got 2X, and the outer and inner terms would combine. So you would add the 3X plus 2X together, and you would get a 5X. Okay, and then you would multiply the last terms together, which I wanted to write as 3 times 2. Okay, so you would multiply the 3 times 2 and get the last term, which was 6. All right, and then that would be your answer. Okay, so a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, remember, what did you multiply together? You multiplied this binomial times this binomial. So those are called factors. It's 2 binomial factors. Remember, what's being multiplied together is called a factor. The answer you get when you multiply your factors is called a product. So this is a trinomial product. All right, so that's really important to understand that these 2 binomials are factors, and when they're multiplied together, they give you a trinomial product. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be starting with a trinomial. Remember, see, factoring a trinomial. And you're going to be starting with a trinomial, and you have to figure out what the 2 factors are. So it's like we're going to be starting with the answer and working backwards and trying to figure out what the problem was. That's what factoring is all about. You're given a product, and you have to figure out what the 2 factors were. So those 2 factors, they're going to be binomials. For this lesson, we're going to end up with an answer that has two binomials. All right, to figure out what the binomials are, you start by saying, okay, because of FOIL, I know that this first term of the product, we got it when we multiplied the first terms of the binomial. So to get your first term of your product, you multiplied the first terms of each binomial. X times x is where we got x squared. Okay, to get the last term of your product, you multiplied the last terms of the binomial. So if we look at the binomial, 2 times 3 gives me 6. All right, so this information is going to be how we figure out what goes here and here. Now, what does this one have to do with it? Well, to get the middle term, you had to add together the 3 and the 2, which are the last terms. Okay, so to get the middle term of the product, you added the last terms together. All right, so these 3 things are what you're going to need to understand to be able to figure out what the factors are when we are given a trinomial. Okay, so again, remember, for every factoring problem, the first thing you always have to remember to do is you will always begin every factoring problem by checking to see if there is a greatest common factor. Okay, so just keeping that in mind, I'm not going to go over that again until we get to the homework problems, but just remember, first thing you check for is a greatest common factor. Okay, so to be able to factor a trinomial into figure out what the 2 binomials are, your first step is going to be to write the parentheses for the answer and determine the first term of each binomial. So in other words, you have a trinomial you're factoring. You know you're going to end up with 2 sets of parentheses because it's going to be a binomial times a binomial, and you can also figure out what the first term will be for each binomial. Okay, so that's the first step. Second step is we need to decide what sign is going to go here. Is it going to be a plus or a minus? So for step 2, to determine the operation or the sign of each binomial, okay, you're going to look at the signs of the trinomial. The last sign is where you go first. You look at this sign. If this sign is a plus, then you know the signs of your binomials are going to be the same. Now, this one will tell you that they will both be positive. Okay, so you'll have your sets of binomials. This is from step 1. Write your 2 sets of parentheses and what the first term will be. Then you look at the sign, go to the last sign. If it's a plus, you know they're going to be the same. They will both be positive. All right, the other option is this last sign can be a plus. That tells you they're the same. And they're both going to be, they will both be negative. All right, so first step is to write your sets of parentheses. Determine what the first term will be. This is x squared, so in the first spot it will have to be x times x. This is a plus sign, so I know the signs are going to be the same. They will both be negative. Okay, if that last term is a minus sign, then the signs are going to be different, and the larger number will be positive. All right, so step 1 is to write my binomials, parentheses. This is an x squared, so I know first terms are going to be x times x. This is a minus sign, so I know the signs are going to be different. The larger number will be positive, and the smaller number will be negative, and you'll see in a minute. Okay, now we come over here. The first term is x squared, so I know I'm going to have x times x. This sign is minus. That tells me my signs are going to be different, and the larger number will be a negative. So my signs are different. Larger is going to be a negative. It doesn't matter which one you write where. I just always put the larger one. Whatever the first sign is, I just put it first, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so you know how to figure out what the first term of each binomial is going to be. You know how to figure out what the signs of each binomial is going to be. Now all we need to do is figure out what numbers will go here. And remember, whatever the last term is in the trinomial, you multiplied those two numbers together to get this number of the trinomial. Okay, so what we're going to do now is you're going to list the factor pairs of the last term. Okay, then you're going to determine which factor pair will add to equal the middle number. Okay, so the last term is a 6. The factor pairs of 6 would be 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Then you have to decide which factor pair would add to give you a 5. Well, it's 2 plus 3 that gives you a 5. Remember, the other factor pair for 6 was 1 times 6, and 1 plus 6 is a 7. So we can't use the 1 and 6. You would have to use the 2 and 3. Okay, let's look at that and actually work it out now. So we have our first example. Okay. Step 1 is to write my binomial parentheses. The first term is x squared, so I know that's going to be x times x, because first terms will give me the first term of my answer. Okay, then we look at the signs. Step 2 is determine the sign for each binomial. This tells me they're the same. And this tells me they will both be positive. So I know my signs are going to be plus and plus. All right, now 24 tells me that two numbers are multiplied together. These two numbers that go here were multiplied together to give me a 24. So I'm going to list the factor pairs of 24. 1 and 24. 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, and 5 won't go into 24, so here's the factor pairs. Okay, so now we're going to do step 4, determine which factor pair will add to give me the middle number. Okay, so 1 plus 24 is 25, 2 plus 12 is 14, 3 plus 8 is 11, oh, there we go, 8, 9, 10, 11. So these factor pairs, 3 plus 8 equals 11. That's my middle term. So I know this is going to be a positive 3 and a positive 8. And that will be my answer. Now, how do you check? Check using FOIL. Okay, so first would be x squared. Outer is 8x, inner is 3x. 8x plus 3x is 11x. And then last terms, 3 times 8 is 24. Okay, so these two numbers have to multiply to give you 24, and these two numbers have to add together to give you 11. All right, let's look at the next example. On page 8 in the packet, Okay, so step 1. Sorry, I'm getting my notes together. Okay, so we have a trinomial, we have to factor it. From experience, you know that a binomial times a binomial gives you a trinomial. So we're going to start off by saying, okay, when I factor this, I know I'm going to have a binomial times a binomial. And then I also know that first term times first term will give me this spot here. This is x squared, so what has to go in the first spots are an x and an x. Okay, step 2 is to determine the sign. So we look here. This is a plus, so that tells me the signs are going to be the same, and they are both going to be minus. So I put a minus and a minus. Okay, step 3 is to list the factor pairs. The reason is because this times this should give me 5. So the factor pairs of 5 are 1 and 5, and that's it. So that factor pair is going to have to give me the middle term when I add them together. So remember, the signs are going to be the same. They'll both be negative. So -1 minus 5 does equal a -6. So I know that these are the factor pairs. Okay, so that's my answer. Now, always check using foil. Oh, foil. Okay, so first terms, x times x is x squared. Outer terms, this is a -5x, and an inner terms is a -1x. -5x and -1x will combine to give me -6x. And then multiplying last terms together, a -1 times a -5 is a +5. So yes, it does work. Okay, let's go to the next example. So step 1, write the parentheses for the answer and determine the first term of each binomial. So I have a trinomial here. I'm factoring it. By experience, you know that a binomial times a binomial will give me a trinomial. So to figure out what was multiplied together, in other words, the factors, what's being multiplied together are called factors. To figure out the factors of this trinomial, I'm going to have a binomial times a binomial. And first terms of the binomials will multiply to give me the first term of the product. So this is x squared, so I know it has to be x times x. Okay, step 2 was to determine the operation for each binomial, or in other words, the sign. This tells me, since it's a minus, that tells me the signs are going to be different. And this one tells me that the larger one will be positive. Okay, so I know the signs are going to be different, so I'm going to go ahead and write that in. Okay, step 3 is to list the factor pairs of 32, because remember, this number times this number will give me 32. So 1 times 32, 2 times 16, 3 won't go into it, 4 times 8, 5 won't go into it, 6 won't go into it, 7 won't go to it, and 8 times 4. Okay, so here's my factor pairs. Now, which factor pair will combine to give me a +4? And remember, the larger one is going to be positive, and the smaller one will be negative. So a +32 minus 1 will give me 31. That's not the middle term. A +16 minus 2 will give me 14. That's not the middle term. A +8 minus 4. Here we go. Okay, so +8 minus 4 will equal 4. That's how I know that 4 and 8 will go here. But remember, the larger number is positive, so a +8 and a -4 gives me a +4. So these two numbers add together to give me 4, and these two numbers multiply together to give me a negative 32. So that's the answer. Now don't forget, you want to check your answer using FOIL. So first term's x squared, outer term negative 4x, inner term is a positive 8x, and the outer and inner will combine to give you that middle term. So negative 4x plus 8x is a positive 4x. And then last term's a positive 8 times a negative 4 is a negative 32, so that's correct. Okay, the last example. Sorry. Okay, we go through the steps. Step 1 is to write the parentheses, and this is a trinomial, so I know when I factor it, I'll have two binomials that were multiplied together to give me this trinomial. First terms would be multiplied together to give me x squared, so that would have to be x times x gives me x squared. Okay, step 2 is determine the signs for each one. This tells me the signs are going to be different. This tells me that the larger number will be negative. So the signs are going to be different. The larger number will be negative, the smaller number will be positive. Okay, what will those numbers be? Well, these two numbers will multiply to give me 15. So I'm going to look at the factor pairs of 15. And that's it. Now I need to decide which factor pair will combine to give me a negative 2. Well, it's a negative 5 and a positive 3. How did I know that the 5 was going to be negative? Because this told me the larger number will be negative. So negative 5 plus 3 is a negative 2. So I know that this one is going to be a minus 5 and this one is going to be a plus 3. So that's my answer. How do you check it? You have to check it using FOIL. So take the time to go, okay, first term's x times x gives me x squared. Outer term, plus 3x. Inner term is a minus 5x. A plus 3x and a minus 5x is a negative 2x. And then last terms, a negative 5 and a plus 3 is a negative 15. So that's correct. All right, now you pause the video and try and work these 4 problems. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and now you want to check and see if you got the 4 problems correct. So you have a trinomial, you have to factor it. When you're factoring a trinomial, you know by experience that you're going to get a binomial times a binomial. Okay, remember factors are what's multiplied together to give you the product. If your product is a trinomial, then your factors will be 2 binomials. Okay, what goes in the first spots of each binomial would be a t, because when you multiply these out, t times t gives you t squared. Okay, step 2 is to figure out the sign. This tells you the signs are the same. This tells you they're both positive. So positive, positive. Okay, now we list the factor pairs of 12. It's 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay, which factor pair will add to give you 8? So we remember both signs are going to be positive. So it's 2 plus 6, that equals 8. So we'll have a 2 and a 6 for the last spots of each binomial. Okay? All right, now pause it and work number 2. Okay, so you've worked number 2. We're starting up again, so let me show you what we do. You have a trinomial, you have to factor it. You know that 2 binomials, by experience, you know 2 binomials multiply to give you a trinomial. So we know we're gonna have 2 binomials, so I write my parentheses for each binomial. And whenever you use FOIL, first terms are multiplied together to give you this. So this would have to be n times n would give me an n squared. Now step 2 is to figure out the sign of each binomial. This tells me the signs are going to be the same. This tells me they will both be positive. So I'm going to put a plus for each one. Now the numbers that go in the last spot of each binomial are multiplied to give me 12. So I'm going to look at the factor pairs of 12. And then I ask myself, well, here it tells me that they're both going to be positive. So then I ask myself, which two factor pairs will add together to give me a 7? And it's the 3 and the 4. So this is a 3, this is a 4. All right, let's check our answer. First terms, n times n is n squared. Outer terms are 4n and 3n. Outer terms are 4n. The inner terms give you 3n. And the last terms give you 3 times 4 is 12. So yes, 12. So the outer and inner combine to give you 7n. All right. So it's correct. Okay. Now we're going to do number 3. Go ahead and pause the video and try number 3 on your own. Okay, you started the video again, and now you're just checking to see if you got it correct. You have a trinomial. When you factor a trinomial or figure out what was multiplied together to give you this trinomial, by experience, you know it's going to be a binomial times a binomial. This first term is p squared, so that means first terms of each binomial had to be a p times p to give you p squared. Okay, this plus tells me the signs are the same. This plus tells me that they're both going to be positive. All right, now the numbers that go here will multiply to give me a 20. So I'm going to look at the factor pairs of 20. 3 won't go into 20, 4 will go into 20. Okay, now you ask yourself, you know that both of the numbers will be positive. So you ask yourself, which factor pair will add, oops, it's not a 9. Which factor pair adds to give you a 9? And it's 4 and 5. So that's your answer. How do you check it? Using FOIL. Okay. First, outer and inner will combine to give you a 9p, and then the last 4 times 5 is 20. All right, so that's correct. Okay, pause it and try number 4, and then you can check your answer. Okay, so you paused it,